the Jews' crescent moon. Wednesday was only Nisan 12. Thursday was only Nisan 13. So Nisan 14, now that was their Passover when they were to slay the lamb. But Jesus became that instead as the sign. The writers of the four Gospels are in perfect harmony on the timing of these events. Did you know there's 2 Passovers in Scripture? A lot of people don't know that. John 18:28. Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment. He had already been captured, and it was early in the morning, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat Passover. So this is after Jesus celebrated Passover in the upper room. But the nation of Israel had not yet celebrated Passover. So we want to know how AD 31 conforms to the facts and to the witnesses. Both the Bible and astronomical data dispute the date of AD 31. Many astronomers have carefully calculated and examined the position of the sun and the moon for all of the years in question. And you can examine it yourself at the U.S. Naval Observatory website. Just search spring phenomena. The conclusion is that 30 AD is the only year that the position of the moon aligns with Scripture. So, here's all my calendars that I prepared, spread out all over my desk. I did 29 AD, looked up all the moons, all the conjunctions, figured Passover. Looked up 31 AD. I looked up 32 AD, which has never been even suggested. I went so far as to 33 AD because there's those that believe it was that late. And I concluded, by the witness of the sun and the moon, that none of these dates were at all possible for the Passover and the crucifixion of Jesus. So the witness of the sun and the moon actually proves the year Jesus was crucified. 30 AD and no other year. So let's review. Time and timing. And why the calendar is important to interpret Bible prophecy. The Jubilee calendar determines if a time prophecy is interpreted as literal or a day for a year. So what we've done is we've established what we will refer to as a rule. A rule has no exceptions, and if my daddy was alive today, he would confirm that. Otherwise, people just make up private interpretations, and we know that. I have been in Bible studies and chat rooms and spoken with the Jehovah's Witnesses when they come to my door. I've spoken to lots of Bible groups and church people, and everyone has their own interpretation. And I ask, why is this literal here? Why is this symbolic here? And no one can explain. No one can tell me why it differs in one place in the Bible and it's different in another place in the Bible. They don't have any rules. So the self-evident rule that we have discovered is this: that during the operation of the Jubilee calendar, time prophecies are interpreted as a day for a year. During the Jubilee calendar, a day equals a year. Prior to 1437 BC, time was literal. There were 40 years in the desert, 40 days of the flood. After 1994, time is literal again. So the time in prophecy that we learned since the beginning was days, weeks, months, and years 7 times. Again, in the book of Revelation, we learn more days, months, years, times, time, and half a time. Oops. This is used 2 times. It's used in Daniel, and it's used in Revelation. What in the world is time, times, and half a time? Houston, we have a problem. God is so clever. God chose the language in Daniel 7 and Revelation 12 because they uniquely conform to the great clocks that he himself created. The Aramaic word Edan, translated as a time in Daniel, refers to a set time in a year that begins at an appointed time. But not any year, like July through June, but a year according to the start of a spring to spring or fall to fall equinox. So, is it years or is it times? Just as God chose weeks instead of years for the 70-year prophecy, he chose times instead of years for the time of persecution. Remember the creation clock? That a year can be as short as 355 days or as long as 384 days, depending upon how many moons are in one revolution of the earth around the sun? God gave us the clue. One cycle of the sun equals 360 degrees of arc. Ancients used this simply because the year had a different number of days each year. It was hard to tell. The sun actually moves 1 degree each day. Do you remember the stick in the backyard? Well, here's our answer. 1 time of the sun equals 1 circle of 360 degrees arc. 2 times of the sun equals 2 circles of arc, or 720 degrees. Half a time equals half a circle, or 180 degrees of arc. And the degrees, 360, 720, and 180, all total up to 1,260 degrees, at a day for a year equals 1,260 years. Synchronized with the Jubilee. Remember this earlier timeline and all these dates that look familiar to you? They were all Sunday Jubilee years. Well, let's just narrow it down, take some out of the equation, and we're going to look at 538 AD to 1798 AD was the 1,260 years of persecution. That is time, times, and half a time. I thought it was pretty unique that it also equals 180 weeks of years. 7 times 180 also equals 1260. God is just so purposeful. The Jubilee calendar is actually confirmed 3 times in the Bible. There are many, many people, scholars included, that don't even believe it exists, never believed it ever existed, and say there is just no such thing. So we need to confirm that the Bible confirms the Jubilee calendar. So the first place that it's confirmed in the Bible is the 70-week prophecy of Daniel, because it actually proves the operation in the synchrony of the Jubilee calendar. But we have to have more than that. All of the specifications of Daniel are fulfilled, nothing to be fulfilled in the future, and all means all. Each and every specification was fulfilled during the 70th week. The second place in the Bible that the Jubilee calendar is confirmed is in Isaiah 37 and Leviticus 25, when God told Israel, I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the old crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest from the 9th year comes in. This confirms the presence and location of a 49th sabbatical year and its sequential 50th year of Jubilee, because Isaiah indicates that Hezekiah's 14th year was a sabbatical year. The third place in the Bible that the Jubilee is confirmed is in Jeremiah with the freeing of the slaves. Every 7th year, each of you must free any fellow Hebrew who has sold himself to you. After he has served you 6 years, you must let him go free. This proves that God continued to hold Israel responsible for the observance of the 7th year sabbaticals. The synchronism of the Jubilee calendar has never been lost, and it's never been arbitrary. Let's review something I mentioned earlier that I'd like to come back to you. The Grand Week. 10 centuries of 1,000 years each equals 7,000 years. That equals 7 millennia. Have you noticed some parallels as we go along here in our study? Have you noticed some patterns in this study? Does Sabbath rest seem to show us some sort of theme that we should be paying attention to? God actually gave us 5 patterns for rest. The first pattern was rest for man, you and I. 6 days of labor plus 1 day of rest. The second pattern was rest for the land. 6 years for production of your crops plus 1 for rest. The Sabbath rest. The third pattern for rest is rest for the earth. 6,000 years of sin plus 1,000 years of rest, a Sabbath rest. The fourth pattern of rest is the land restored. Here's that 49-year clock, 7 cycles of weeks and years. Jubilee year equals the Sabbath rest for you. We have the land restored to its rightful owners in the 50th year of Jubilee, the Sabbath rest year. The fifth pattern of rest is the earth restored. 7,000 years, and then the eternal Jubilee, the eternal Sabbath rest. The new heaven and the new earth. Here's a little chart where all of the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation fit into a 7,000-year theme. Where are we today? Looks a little close. So if the 6,000 years of sin didn't end in 1994 with the end of the Jubilee calendar, then when is the end of 6,000 years? Good question. Shouldn't the seventh millennium be soon beginning? The answer lies within this one question. When did sin begin? Adam was created in 4014 BC. That's an assertive statement. How do we know that? My favorite hobby. Genealogy. Those dreadful and boring begat, and begats. Here's a little chart I made. If Adam was created in 4014 BC, I started in the Exodus at 1437 BC, worked backwards with the biblical begats to 4014 BC. Then we can move forward in time. There was the flood, by the way, about halfway through. But we move forward to 702 BC, which is a Jubilee Sunday year. We continue forward in time to the crucifixion in 30 AD. That was during the 70 weeks of Daniel. We move forward to 1994 at the end of the 70 Jubilee cycles, which is right here. And then that means today we are about right here. Now, what we have to look forward to are the 1,000 years of Revelation, the 1,335 days in Daniel, that puts us right prior to those events. So, after seeing this, do you believe we're living in the final days of Earth's history? If you don't say yes, you've been nodding out. You've been napping. So here's some food for thought. If Adam and Eve lived in the garden 30 years before sin, then 2016 is the end of the 6,000 years. If Adam and Eve lived in Eden 33 years before sin occurred, then 2018 will be the end of 6,000 years. Perhaps, just perhaps, Adam, when he was tempted by the devil, could have been the same age as Jesus when Jesus was tempted by the devil, but Jesus overcame the devil. Could they have been the same age? If that's the case, 2018 is the end of 6,000 years. If Adam and Eve lived in Eden 40 years, 2026 will be the end of 6,000 years. So here's more food for thought. Throughout the Bible, God has used 70 as a probationary period of time. The 70 years in Babylonian captivity proves that God's clocks operate whether man regards their presence or not. Each time man fails, the God of mercy increases the next probationary period of time. His patience gets longer. Let's look at how his mercy increases. God tested Israel on the observance of the Sabbath day. 6 days of manna, 7 days. God tested Israel for 40 days that resulted in 40 years of captivity in the wilderness. God tested Israel for 70 sabbatical years that resulted in 70 years captivity in Babylon. God again tested Israel, but this time for a longer 70 weeks, resulting in his final rejection of Israel. So the years allotted for the duration of sin appears to be 7,000 years or 70 centuries. The 1,000 years is the 7th millennium, God's Sabbath millennium, the last day of the week of 7 millenniums. So my conclusions before I leave is that the measurement of time is a very complex process simply because the motion of the planet never aligns for us in a convenient way. God designed a calendar that wasn't based on complex calculations, but instead of just simply observing a weekly cycle. Man has invented and used many types of calendars through the years, but only God's system is perpetually self-correcting each month and each year. The accuracy of God's marvelous method of timekeeping is never hampered with the fact that some years have 12 moons and some have 13. It's not frustrated that some years have 355 days and some have 384. It's not upset by bad weather or the position of the planet during its rotation around the sun. The synchrony of the clocks force certain events to be positioned at certain times in Earth's history. God's calendar is the only one that's adequate for an entire world. To ensure that the synchrony of all 7 units of God's time would never be lost or forgotten, he commanded Israel to observe a number of feasts and rituals at appointed times each year. No man-made calendar could ever accurately determine these feasts in advance. How clever was God to impose on mankind obligations that actually contributed to the preservation of his timing. What a marvelous God. Now, nearly 6,000 years later, we're waking up to discover that we are living in Earth's final hour. Jesus is coming soon, and his appearing will be right on time. Thank you.